All right, well, welcome everybody. Here we are on podcast number 3, and I have to say, we've broadcasted some of these podcasts from what we call the green room, but I think right now we are in the greenest place at Harvard. Right? We are celebrating Earth Day this month, April, and I'll let Andrew do the introduction, but we've got, I think, an extremely special guest this month.
Absolutely. Rob Gogan, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
So I think everybody probably knows Rob at this point, but for those who don't, Rob, maybe you could just give a little introduction and just tell us a little bit about yourself and your time at Harvard.
Sure. Well, I started at Harvard in 1990 working on recycling. I was a graduate student, frustrated with the poor recycling at the Graduate School of Education, which is not to cast aspersions on them. That was the way it was everywhere. But that was in the era of the memo and print publications galore. Every grad student had a mailbox, and if you didn't empty that out every day, you had a mountain of papers to sort through. We had all these papers. There was no recycling. There were pockets of recycling in computer printout labs. Remember the old green bar paper? I'm sure you don't.
It was like on a little pinwheel. Right?
Yeah,
The edges,
the pins on the side,
edges, yeah.
the tractor feed pin strips, and dot matrix printer. But that was worth some money. So there were people who did that. The Office of the University Publisher, back when Harvard printed a lot of its own publications, had a huge vacuum system to suck up the excess papers, the trimmings, the dust that had a lot of paper fibers, pack it automatically into a big compactor, and send that off and sell it. And then we had the bottle bill, which started around when I started as a grad student in 1984, and that took the bottles and cans, which was a bigger fraction of the weight than it is now, much bigger. Number one, more people drank carbonated beverages then. Now it's all juices and waters and teas and Snapple and all that kind of thing. But back then it was Coke, Pepsi, ginger ale, Dr. Pepper, orange, so much more carbonated beverages, which were all covered in the bottle bill. By that time I was consulting part-time with the facilities department on recycling. Then in 1991, the man who oversaw the trash collection at Harvard announced he was going to retire. So I thought, I'm already doing recycling. If I did the trash too, I could roll both of those into one job, waste manager. So I wrote my job description, included credentials that only I had. I was the only person in North America that had extensive knowledge of every faculty of Harvard, extensive knowledge of local recycling markets, understanding and rapport with Cambridge Recycling Ordinance and the Cambridge Department of Public Works, because I went to their monthly recycling advisory committee meetings as Harvard's representative, etc. And so they hired me in March of 93. So I finally got benefits in March of 93, full-time recycler. And I wasn't alone. Well, I was alone at Harvard, but there was a grad student at Yale who became Yale's first recycling coordinator, grad student at University of Minnesota, Minneapolis-St. Paul, who became their first recycling coordinator. Grad student at University of Chicago became their first recycling. Grad student at Columbia became their first. So we just kind of, because of environmental passion and knowledge of local recycling markets, and we were right there at the right time, the right place, we jumped into this niche that was, no one knew it was a niche at Harvard until 1993 when it became a recycling mandate. So that's when I started doing it full time.
The right man for the job.
Absolutely.
In the right place.
In the right place, in the right time.
Well, with that, so obviously Drew Faust's new announcement recently about Harvard going fossil fuel neutral by 2030 and then fossil fuel free by 2050. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of what you're looking forward to, what options are out there, and what kind of excites you about the whole announcement, going sustainable?
Well, obviously the federal government has abdicated its role as a climate leader. And we have to look to the states and institutions and certain corporations to show us and inspire us to go become responsible global citizens in the future. And Harvard, its whole premise is based on the future. It's the founding mission of Harvard is something like, when we lie in the dust, we'll have educated people to carry on for us. And what kind of a future are we going to have for our graduates if the Boston area is flooded because of rising seas, the climate is untenable for agriculture, and unless we move to Greenland and follow the other climate refugees, we have no place to live, and eventually no place on earth to live. And that's obviously one of the greatest sins we could commit in this generation. So I'm daunted by the goal, and in thinking about how are we going to deal with all the materials we need. We have 42,000 full-time equivalent students, staff, and faculty on this campus. They need food. They need 16,000 of them need a place to live. 30,000 of them need a place to work. Offices, labs, libraries, these all have to be built, maintained, furnished, and equipped. The average flow of materials on and off campus from Harvard is about 15,000 tons a year. It takes a tremendous amount of energy to do that. We've demonstrated over the years that we don't consume all of our goods for reuse or recycling on campus. In fact, every year we recover around 3,000 tons of material for organic disposal off campus, another 4,000 tons of material for single stream recycling, scrap metal, wood recycling, and then about another 1,000 tons of bulk materials for electronics, reusable clothing for reuse, furniture for reuse, etc., and about 6,000 tons that we have to landfill or incinerate. So we haven't figured out how to recycle, reduce, prevent, or compost that last 6,000 tons. So that consumes a lot of energy, getting that stuff delivered to us and off campus. But that's a small fraction of the energy that's required to grow the food, ship it, and to manufacture the materials, mine all the ores and extract all the resins from the petrochemical industry, extract the wood and forest products, harvest the ocean products. In fact, I've seen estimates of from 70 to 200 times the weight of the products that we receive in our hands, the tables, papers, magazines and foods, etc., clothes, 70 to 200 times the weight of those products that's generated as waste in producing those products.
Wow. So when you look at it on a source basis, and it can be a lot greater.
Yeah. The way Harvard accounts for its energy does not, and the greenhouse gas generated, does not include materials. That's in Scope 3. Also in Scope 3 is things like air travel or commuting, the pollution that's generated by the student, staff, and faculty that come to and from Harvard.
And that Scope 3 that you mentioned is part of the initiative that is somewhat yet to be defined, right?
Yeah. It's something we want, and our Office for Sustainability very much wants to account for, but it's a much bigger, harder problem than just looking at this one institution.
Right. Yeah, and that's a big challenge when you look at the supply chain management and seeing how that supply chain is also, on board with what you're trying to do. That's tough to get a buy-in from, your supply chain. I would
Right.
think in a lot of aspects, especially things that are being made overseas, where you don't really have any control.
Well, one of the things that we're working on now with the Office for Sustainability and the Office of Strategic Procurement, OFS has made safer materials a priority. Their three big priorities are food, energy, and waste. But the safety of the materials we take onto our campus is kind of an important sidebar they're working on right now. And one of the things we're asking all the companies that sell furniture to Harvard to do is to, in coordination with Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville fire departments, take out all flame retardants. Because flame retardants have been proven to be very bad for certain aspects of people's health. So that's one small example of the kind of steps we're going to need to take much, much more aggressively with our suppliers in order to meet the carbon neutral and eventually carbon free pledges that Drew Faust has set up for us. If I had my druthers, we would not have my department at Harvard because there'd be no waste.
You wouldn't need it.
You wouldn't need it.
Have you seen any examples of suppliers taking on that moral responsibility of removing the waste that they initially deliver to you?
Darn few, but
Yes,
they exist.
They do.
One of the best ones is RICO.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you an important message from the Radcliffe Green Team. Check, check. Hey, this is Eric.
This is Andrew.
This is Dahlia.
This is Robson.
And we're going to remind you, Friday the 13th, this April, be there or be square, the Walk for Wellness in the Radcliffe Yard. We'll see you at 12.
RICO
Copiers.
has the contract for copiers, toners, and they'll recycle it all. So they're a true zero waste company. That's getting at that productive round trip model that I would like to see grow more and more.
I think we have one final question for you. We touched on composting a little bit. Obviously, composting is really taking off, not just here at Harvard, but it seems like just in a lot of local communities. I know Cambridge is now doing curbside pickups and whatnot.
This very week,
This very week,
City of Cambridge has expanded curbside composting to the entire city.
which is
They've done it on the
huge.
Monday route for a while, but now it's the entire city, all units 1 to 12.
Wow.
And within the next year, they expect to go up to all units 1 to 100. So we've been composting, or I should say, we've been recovering our organic waste for the purpose of composting for since 1991. In 91, we started recovering our autumn leaves, and we took them for about 10 years to the Arnold Arboretum to be composted into topsoil. And Harvard's own landscapers have been doing this for that period of time. The Arnold Arboretum decided they wanted to use this space for other purposes, but we're still recovering our our landscape waste for recycling as part of our organic recycling program. It's also mandated by the state and the city to not to landfill or incinerate our leaves or other organic landscape material. But starting in 97, we started collecting food scraps. From 97 through 2017, we sent our food scraps to farms. And we never delivered our food in such a way that it could be fed as nutrition to livestock. There are campuses around the country, including University of Rhode Island, Rutgers University, that collected their food scraps to feed pigs or dairy cows. But there are certain sanitary requirements you have to fill in order to do that. you have to steam cook the food before you serve it to the animals. So you have to have a farmer that it's worth their while to come pick up your food scraps, and they have the hardware to cook the food. And what they usually do, the big ones, is they'll have like a packer truck with a steam hose fitting, and the entire garbage truck becomes like a pressure cooker.
Wow.
And they raise it up to a certain temperature, 180 degrees for 15 minutes or something like that. And after it's cooked and cooled, they can serve it to their animals. But we don't have pig farmers or dairy farmers close enough to Harvard to do that. But we've sent the food scraps to farms, and there was a while when we also composted our animal bedding, all of our animal bedding. Now we can only compost the animal bedding from our biological research laboratories. We can't do it from any place that might have a clinical experimentation for clinical purposes. So we've stopped doing that, even though that's by far the majority of the animal bedding we generate. Harvard has several 100,000 lab animals, and they're constantly generating dirty cage cleanings that we have to get rid of. Some of it, if it's treated animals, it has to be incinerated or sent to a hazardous waste disposal facility. It's red bag material. But some of it can be composted. And it's an excellent product for composting because it's a perfect balance of nitrogen and carbon. The farms used to love our food scraps too. Harvard generates lots of food scraps because it would replenish the depleted nutrients in the soil, and they could sell it, and they would mix it and sift it and blend it with soils and make a variety of soil amendment products. But starting this fall, we had the opportunity to send our food scraps to a facility in Charlestown, 5 miles from our campus, where it would be liquefied, blended, and then strained, and all the food scraps will dissolve in water. Some of the serviceware would dissolve, like napkins, paper towels, and some of the paper plates. But all of the compostable cups, bowls, knives, forks, spoons will be screened off and incinerated. Not landfilled, but incinerated. But then the slurry would be pumped into tanker trucks and sent to a wastewater treatment plant in Andover. Now, and there it would go to a digester to be cooked down into biogas, which is pretty much the same as natural gas. This biogas, or methane, would be used to power generators and heat. So this June, the Greater Lawrence Sanitary District is going to open a combined heat and power plant that runs entirely on digested food waste. So, and Harvard generates right now about 10% of what they receive. Harvard and Radcliffe. When I say Harvard, I mean include Radcliffe. Radcliffe is a very important part of Harvard. But the total Harvard campus food generation powers about 10% of the material that goes to Greater Lawrence. But this is a great model for the future because it takes a currently unrecovered waste stream, food scraps, which represent about a quarter of municipal solid waste, and send it to a nearby place, wastewater treatment facility that currently is over capacity. And just about all the wastewater treatment plants on the East Coast and West Coasts are operating under capacity because 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago when these were built, we were using more water per person than we are now. That was before the days of low-flow showers, high-efficiency toilets, water-reducing front-load clothes washers and dishwashers. So right now, the Deer Island wastewater treatment facility in Boston is only running at 58% of its former capacity. One of those big egg tanks you may have seen on the shores of Boston Harbor is completely idle. So it's underused capacity that if we recovered more of our food scraps in the greater Boston area, that could start running that digester, and it would reduce the use of natural gas or other fossil fuels to heat and power that facility.
Well, Rob, thank you very much for taking the time. It was a pleasure
Yeah.
talking to you.
Yeah.
No, thank you much. And you have to remember, for anybody that hasn't been down here before, every Thursday.
Every Thursday, 11 to 2, we give away about 2 tons of furniture, supplies, and equipment, clothing. Right now in the warehouse, we have a gigantic comfy sack. I don't know if you know what that is. I just learned today. It is comfy. It's 8 feet wide, 3 feet thick, and 3 feet deep, stuffed with memory foam chair.
Wow.
The most comfortable chair you or your kids will ever sit in. Perfect for your recreation room. And we've got 7 couches, all in fair to good condition. We've got 5 Herman Miller chairs, which retailed for $600 each.
Wow.
They're all on they're called the Satellite. And they were produced in 2001, but they're on casters. They're excellent quality. And if you hurry, you too can own one of these beautiful products, free for the hauling.
The price is
right. Yeah, right. Well, Rob, thank you again.
Yeah,
really
thank you so
appreciate
much.
taking your time to meet with us and talk a little bit about kind of recycling and composting and all those kind of things. So.
It's what I call